On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we discuss the Lightning's 4-2 win on the road in Anaheim, picking up their first win on this West Coast trip. We talk about all of that and more, but first, let's play that music.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment below and give us a like. And also, if you're following us on a audio platform, leave 5 stars as well. And don't forget to subscribe, more importantly. On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're discussing the 4-2 win last night against the Ducks. And this is a big win. I think, I've stated it over the last couple of episodes that any win on a West Coast trip for an Eastern Conference team is big. I mean, these are the games, especially like I said, I mean, we saw it in the game against the Kings, is that really, these are the kind of games where, regardless of a team's record, you look at the record of these teams that the Lightning will be playing. The Kings the other night, the Ducks the other night, last night, excuse me, and then the Sharks on Saturday. If you're looking just at the standings and looking at their overall records thus far, uh, not good teams. But if you're watching the games, you're watching how these teams play, very gritty, going out there, not rolling over, like some of the other teams in the league that don't have as good of records either. But and that's what I warned all of you, the listener, or if you're watching us on YouTube, that's what I warned about, and I was most worried about this road trip is because the Lightning came obviously into this road trip still struggling, and the first night against the Kings wasn't exactly a perfect way to start things, but they bounced back in this game against the Ducks. Not exactly a pitcher perfect win, if we really want to chalk it down. The Lightning, for a majority of the game, I think I know there were certain sequences throughout the game, back and forth, where the Lightning were, for the most part, in control. But there was other times where, especially to start the game, I thought the Lightning were playing on their heels. They were letting this Ducks team go out there and really just dictate the flow of the game from the initial puck drop, and it resulted in that Trevor Zegras goal, which I wish I could have spent more time on the last episode talking about that, because really I didn't give Trevor Zegras enough attention. He's if you're just following the NHL, if this is your first season, Trevor Zegras, or if you don't know much about Trevor Zegras other than the things you've seen on social media, very explosive player, guy who could do a lot of things on the ice, who could hurt you in many ways, and the Lightning allowed him to get an opportunity, and he did not miss it. And he had a couple of opportunities in this game where, especially down the line, there was Brian Elliott had to make a great save on him to keep the game close. And these are the kind of games that frustrate me because, like I said, yes, I'm giving a lot of credit to the Ducks. I think that they're a tough team despite their record. They're a team I spoke about on the Locked On NHL podcast that with my co-host Chris Masilli that I think is going to eventually figure it out that their record doesn't define them, and I feel like that in this game as well, and I feel like that the same way with the Lightning as well as in this case too. You saw a hard fought game from this Lightning team. You saw everybody get involved. I don't like to toot my own horn here on the show, and if you're a longtime listener or watcher, you're going to say, Adam, you're full of it. And you know what? You are true. But, I did predict that this was going to be the road trip that we were going to see Kucherov get going. He's been collecting a 1,000 points. I mean, we all know that Kucherov is an assist machine. You're never going to have any issues there with him, but it's always the goals. I feel like he always scores in bunches. He got one in this game. So it was good to see that, and we're starting to see maybe the beginnings of one of his streaks, where maybe over the next couple of weeks we could see him net maybe 4 goals. But Mikhail Sergachev getting involved, goal in this one as well. Brandon Hagel getting involved. Nick Paul, I mean, it's an empty netter, so I'm not going to get crazy about it. Who knows what that does for the attitude of a player on an empty netter? I mean, maybe it is. Maybe it's just kind of like, all right, one is the start of possibly, potentially, maybe. Maybe that's how he looks at it. But yeah, a hard fought game for the Lightning overall. Would have liked to have seen a better performance in the faceoff circle. 1 for 3 on the power play, so have can't have any problems there. 19 blocks, and the Ducks had just as many. So, really, these are the kind of games that when the Lightning play like this, you could almost pencil them in to win, because at the end of the day, if they show up and play this way against every team, which is very hard to replicate in the National Hockey League, if they go on and do this on a nightly basis, out of 5 games, if they could do this 3 times, I think they're in a pretty good position going forward. Um, but if they could play like this, if they could carry that momentum from this game, which they have struggled to do over the last couple of years. I mean, other than the playoffs, and I spoke about this last week, it is very rare that you have seen, other than that long win streak that they had before the season was cut short in 1920. Um, Other than that, I mean, this team has, for the most part, really struggled to string wins together. They'll win 4 in a row here, 3 in a row here, but for the most part, it's a struggle for this team. They'll have a great win, and they'll follow that up with a very close one, maybe sometimes a game that they really didn't deserve to win. And then, follow up with an absolute squeaker at the end where they just can't muster up enough to take that one. And then they follow up another game where they completely just are a no show. And this is what this team needs to fix. And like I said, I think the West Coast is such a great road trip to have, heading especially into the month of November, where you're going to have a gauntlet of division rivals as well as other talented hockey teams coming and going into Amalie, and then also going into those arenas as well. But yeah, overall great game. My only issue with this, I really don't want to nitpick, because I really like, for the most part, how everyone on this team played. Uh, and even Brian Elliott, kudos to him. I mean, you with Brian Elliott, and I spoke about this last year, is that, and you saw a strong performance out of him, is that I felt like I feel like very early on, and maybe I'm contradicting myself from last year. Um, I don't know. I feel like Coop is playing Elliott too much right now, or maybe Vasilevskiy too little. Maybe let's look at it that way. And we'll talk about this more after the break. But something to think about. Yeah, I just think that Coop Cooper saw that Vasilevskiy was a little bit more tired than he would have liked at the end of the year. I mean, I was screaming and hollering throughout the entire season last year, "Why are you playing Vazzy so much?" And it almost seemed at certain times throughout the season that he refused to play to play Elliott, and that's why when Elliott finally played, got into some games, uh, in certain situations, he was just not successful. And I really think more, maybe, we'll talk about this more in just a bit in the second segment of the show, but I don't know, maybe Cooper is trying to get those cobwebs and trying to get those wheels rolling, those cobwebs off Elliott, meaning get him some more burn early in the season, so when he does decide to you know let Vasilevsky run a little bit more and then starts to pull him back in before the playoffs, I think it won't be as much of a shock almost to Elliott, where we saw certain times last year down the road, Elliott really struggled, and that wasn't entirely his fault. There were certain situations, certain games where just the Lightning did not show up, and then there was other times where Elliott was just stone cold out there, and we saw him kind of pick it up at the end of the year, which was great, and but a little too late, too soon, because those were really his last games of the year. So we'll talk about a little bit more about that because I really want to dive into that because I'm curious as to what maybe the thought process might be with John Cooper not playing Vasilevskiy as much right now in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about today's sponsor. A word from our sponsors is BetOnline. Now, betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs. Football season's in full swing. We got the NHL in full swing. The NBA season just started. So, a lot of money you could throw out there, a lot of money potentially you could win. And the only place you want to put in your bets because they have the best odds out of all these sites is betonline.net. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. It's also the fastest and easiest way to check on all your favorite games, events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. So moving on or continuing actually the conversation that I started, the point that I was making before, um, Andrei Vasilevskiy. Now, very interesting thing that has been happening over the NHL the last couple of years, and that is a lot of people, and I've had this argument with a couple of hosts, and when I say argument, we're not screaming at each other. It's more of a uh, difference in philosophies with a couple other hosts. I'm more of a old school mentality when it comes down to goalie situations. Um, you pick your guy, you ride him for the entire year. I think if you're a goaltender, especially a guy like Vasilevsky, uh, he should be getting maybe 55, 60 starts a year. I think that's a good, or maybe 50 to 60 starts, 60 being ridiculously extreme. Um, 50, 55, I think that's good enough. But in recent years, obviously, you've kind of had to pull him back just because he is really, I feel like he's obviously, dog tired from the playoffs, playing two Stanley Cup, having two deep runs to the Stanley Cup in the span of 9 months. That kills you, especially your goaltender. I mean, he's managed to figure it out and try and get it together here and there. So looking last year, he played 63 games, and like I said, I was screaming, I was hollering, I, even looking at that still, I'm shocked. I'm shocked that is how many games he played, and still the Lightning were able, thanks to him, very huge thanks to him, we're able to go back to Stanley Cup final where, I mean, really what it come down to at that point, I mean, we could talk about this all day, that whole Stanley Cup final, other than the other players on the team, Vasilevsky, there was moments of brilliance and there was moments where, if he didn't have his mask on, I wouldn't be surprised if his jaw was just, his mouth was completely open, breathing as hard as he could just to get some air in. And to put that in perspective, how a little bit how much he struggled last year. He had a goals against average of 2.49, the highest since the 1920 season, and it's a little bit of a different way to look at that because that was a shortened season as well. But if you want to go all the way back to the last time that we had an 82 game season prior to that was 18-19, where Vazzy's was only a 2.40, whereas his save percentage was 925, and then last year was 916. So a little bit of a drop off there, not that drastic, but if you saw those games, if you were able to watch every single game Vasilevsky played in, it's kind of what you saw in the playoffs for the most part. He had moments of absolute brilliance, and then he had moments where it was, you kind of had to pinch yourself and say, what is going on with this guy? Is this the first game of the season for him? You almost had to sit there and kind of question whether or not you were watching opening night. Um, And I think maybe John Cooper realized that, especially midway through the playoffs, and especially down that last stretch of the regular season um, where really he noticed a lot of this from Vasilevskiy. And by the way, I forgot to mention last year was the second most goals he allowed uh, in his career. The first being in the 17-18 season. So that kind of puts things in perspective there for you. Um, but yeah, so I think Cooper took note of that. I think he realized, and I think at certain points throughout the playoffs or down the stretch, he actually had, I believe he actually spoke about it in his decision, because I'm sure I wasn't the only Lightning fan or even the person covering the Lightning that had the same thought. I was like, why is, I mean, they've already clinched, why, what's going on here? Why are we throwing Vazzy out, two, 3 times in a row, especially on a back to back? And I feel like now what we've seen in the first couple of weeks uh, is a little bit of an overreaction. Now, maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm thinking, am I being maybe a little bit, contradictive of the point I made last year? And I think no. I think, the first couple of weeks for a goaltender, especially a guy like Vazzy, who I feel like needs to play a lot. And I feel like that's with every goaltender. They have to play a lot to kind of stay up to, game speed. You can't really simulate that in practice. Plus, why would you want to? Because, fearing that your number one guy, him also being one of the top 3 goalies in the league, gets hurt. And then, you have that nightmare on your hands. But yeah, I think it's a very double-edged sword, this situation, and I get both sides of it. I get Cooper not wanting to play Vazzy on a back-to-back here, but when you look at the Lightning, the amount of games that they have had off, days that they have had off between games, I mean, coming into this road trip, if I'm not mistaken, from the Islander game, to which Vazzy didn't even play. He had 3 days off, plays in the Kings game, loses that one, and then gets off immediately the night after. I mean, I want to know what the thought process there really is, because if you think about it, ask yourself, how is he supposed to get going? How is he supposed to get going? And maybe John Cooper, his thought process on the other side of that is, well, you know what? We'll throw him against the Kings, give him off that night, and then he has extra more days. He has 3 more days to go before he plays a lowly Sharks team, and then that's when we really let him out of the barn in November, when they play the Senators, Carolina, the Sabres, who I think have, not crazy impressive, not a team that I think is going to challenge for a playoff spot, but I think is still doing a lot better than a lot of people would have figured that they were going to do in the opening weeks of the season. And then you got Edmonton and Washington. And then you got so you got Washington home and away following Edmonton. So maybe that's the thought process here. Maybe if John Cooper's thinking, let me save him here, let me give him as much rest, because November is going to be crazy. And I think thus far, yeah, if you're looking at the schedule, November is going to be tough. November, and my co-host from Locked On NHL, Chris Basili, says, you really kind of get an idea of what a team is by Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving. I like to differ with that. I think more so the team that you have by New Year's is the team you're going to have for the rest of the season. That's just me, barring some incredibly world shattering trade where in another multiverse, the Lightning had the cap space and were able to trade for Patrick Kane, or, one of the top stars in the league. That's not going to happen. So don't hold your breath. But I, I think maybe that's the thought process here. I think Coop is realizing that these 3 teams on the West Coast, this team is still, even though top heavy, still good enough, still talented enough to win these games, whether or not Vasilevskiy is on the ice. You saw that last night with Elliott in goal, um, and still have a game, very tough game on Saturday against San Jose, and then back for Tuesday against Ottawa at home. So yeah, maybe that's the thought process. Maybe Coop thinks that let me save him, let me save my thoroughbred for November and just let him go nuts. I would say, especially with the amount of days between certain matchups that Vasilevskiy would have. I mean, there's only one back to back, and it's on the road. So he'll probably play one of those if I was Coop. So they're playing on the 28th and 29th up in Boston, and I mean, up in Buffalo and then Boston. I would imagine that Vasilevskiy is going to have him. I mean, Coop is going to have Vasilevskiy play on the 25th on the Thanksgiving showdown, which is going to be a game all over national TV. So obviously he's going to have his best goalie play against him, play on national television. And they have a big enough break before that against the Bruins, so why not? Um, and then I would probably, if I was Coop, I would have him play that game and then sit against Buffalo and have him play against Boston. So really backtracking, I kind of got a little ahead of myself there. But backtracking, I really think if I'm Cooper looking at November real quick, um, I would have him play against Ottawa, Carolina, Buffalo, Edmonton, and then he has 2 days off. Have him play against the Capitals in Washington. Sit him on the 13th against the Capitals at home. Have him play against Dallas, Calgary. Have Elliott play in Nashville on the 19th. Have Vazzy against Boston, and then have Vazzy play against St. Louis, and then have Vasilevskiy finish out the month by playing against Boston and sitting against Buffalo. So yeah, I think that's the plan. I think that really anything more than I think I said it was 3 starts for Elliott. I think anything more than 3 starts for Elliott in this month is a little excessive. Um, and I've said it many times. I love the fact that they went out and got Brian Elliott last year in free agency. He's a great replacement for Curtis McElhinney, who retired the year prior, and a great backup goalie to have. And so, yeah, but at the same time, you don't want to play this guy too much, especially because this isn't a 2 goalie system. You got to thoroughbred in the barn, let him out. So that's my thought process on there. So yeah, let us know below in the comments below. Is Cooper underplaying Vasilevskiy, or you think he's gearing him up for a crazy month of November? Let us know in the comments below. So yeah, I would say yeah, I think that anything more for Elliott is you're kind of holding your top goaltender from getting things going, especially in a big month. So wrapping things up, I just want to remind everybody that, if you're following us, if you're watching us on YouTube, please go ahead and drop us a like, hit the notification bell, and subscribe. So as soon as the newest episode drops, you are notified and able to watch right away. And if you're listening to us on an audio platform, drop 5 stars, really helps the show. And if you want to follow us on social media, go ahead. We are on Instagram, Twitter. So LO_lightning on Twitter, as well as locked_lightning on Instagram. So yeah, overall a really good game, I think, last night. A very good effort by this team as well. A very good bounce back win. I don't really think there's really nothing. I don't think there's really no such thing as a bad bounce back win. I've never heard of one. I don't even know if such a case is even a reality, but I'm sure I'll talk about it on this show at some point if it does present itself. But yeah, I really, thus far throughout this road trip, I mean, ideally you wanted the Lightning to start off the road trip by beating Los Angeles, a very winnable game in my opinion, even with Jonathan Quick and net. Um, and then you have Gibson the other night, who Gibson last night I thought played well. Like I said, um, he was going to give the Lightning a tough task, and that was to really do, a lot and be active and really shake things up, and they did. And you saw it in the scoring sheet. You had a contribution from everybody, and that's what you need, and that's how this Lightning team thrives. They're not a one-dimensional hockey team where you have maybe 1 or 2 guys or maybe 3 guys that really contribute on a nightly basis in the goal sheet. No, this is a team effort. This is a team sport. This is a Lightning team that has the assets and the players to be able to have that revolving door of who plays hero on a given night. This, if you want to look at a team that tries to do the 2-3 player system where they have just not even a handful of guys that could really do that for them on a nightly basis, look at Edmonton. Look at Edmonton. Perfect example. And how has that shaped up for them thus far? In my opinion, not so good. So yeah, a lot of contributions last night. You saw 2 points from Nick Paul. You saw a point from Cooch, of course. Stamkos got another point. Perbix, who we'll talk about on a later episode. We got a fan mail question on Twitter. And by the way, go ahead and tweet to us. Hit us up in the comment section on YouTube as well. For mailbags, and then we'll put together a segment for that. And then Sergachev and Hedman with points. And so, a really great group effort last night. Try and say that 3 times really fast. I'm not going to, because I'm not going to make a fool of myself. But yeah, really want to see the Lightning capitalize on this, something that they haven't really been able to do consistently. We saw that coming into this road trip against Florida, and then picking up another win against the Islanders, and then just kind of just taking a step back. And we don't want this team taking a step back. So, but it's they got to take it one game at a time. So let's continue to improve. Let's go ahead, beat San Jose on Saturday, come back, beat Ottawa at home, and then got yourself a streak. And we'll be talking all of that and more going forward. So, keep an eye on that. And in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you next one.